You often hear stories of people that are truly embittered, right? They're just angry individuals and they've been thrust into some perhaps economic loss or a relationship has broken down and it just goes on. And they're blaming someone else. They're blaming their ex girlfriend or boyfriend, or they're blaming a business partner if it's been a bad financial relationship, whatever it is. Blaming and blaming. But they've made certain decisions along the way, haven't they? And in the end, every decision I've ever made in my life, I have to take responsibility for 100%. And this, of course, is a little bit painful because when we're younger, we don't have a lot of choice, we feel. Our parents kind of ramrod us, if you will, press gang us into certain things, maybe into our studies, want to learn the piano, which was in my case, I was forced to learn the piano. And I always blamed my mother for this. But then when I was 20 years old or 16 years old, I took up playing the piano. And I played in a rock and roll band for a period of time, and it was great fun. So even though it was her decision initially, I had adopted that decision and it worked out well for me. So I think this is a good concept. Wherever I go, whatever I do in my life, it is my responsibility. I must accept my own decisions along the way. When I was 19 years old, I lived in this small little village. It was my gap year, and I worked a year after high school in this television and stereo store selling. And our area at the time was awash with money from mostly the forestry and fishing as well, but mostly forestry. And there was a lot of money being spent on electronic goods, of course, especially a good sound system. This was really a point of status for individuals to have a good sound system. And they would come in our shop and I would sell them, and I was good at it. And the man who owned it, he said to me, "Leon, I can see you're good at this. Why don't you spend 5 years here and I'll make you a partner?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I will give you, I think it was 20 or 25% of this business legally if you stay these 5 years." And of course, he's thinking 75% in his case of something huge is a lot bigger than 100% of something small. So he was promoting this idea. And I really contemplated this. Gosh, I would have been 22 or 23 years old, and I'd have been a wealthy young man in this limited village, of course. And I would have had a girlfriend and a car and a house and all sorts of societal things at a very early age. Certainly my peers would have struggled to have acquired the same. And so I didn't know what to do. And then at the last moment, I fortunately had an argument with my girlfriend and I made the decision. I refused his offer and I went off to Hungary and then subsequently to Europe. I went to school in Europe. Now, that decision has impacted my life because I'm sitting here some 50 years later now with the results of that particular decision. And gosh, I'm happy for it because certainly materially, there is no way I've ever been able to actually achieve that level of financial success, but I've surpassed my imagination in psychological and emotional success doing what I wanted to do, which was learning languages and studying, etc., etc. So that one small decision changed my life. So I think whatever you do, think to yourself, I'm responsible for my decisions. And when the decision goes sideways, which A lot of decisions are bad decisions. I must also be responsible, feel responsible for that. And that kind of decision, which produces an extremely negative result, cannot produce a regret. Oh, I'm so sad I did this. No way. You have to say to yourself, this has been a lesson. Whatever that lesson was, this is a lesson, and I will not repeat this mistake again. For sure. Not repeat it. But I still have to realize that the decision I made was what actually occurred. Small story, another one. One time many years ago, I was to get on an airplane. And a friend of mine said, come on, Leon, let's go. And for whatever reason, I delayed, and then he kind of left. There used to be a lot of coastal airplanes around where I lived on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And you could take a short ride for 10 minutes, and that would take you probably 4 or 5 hours by car, but a very short distance by airplane. So this was one of those times. Going to take this short flight, I think it was 8 minutes, right, to fly to Vancouver Island. And then I would borrow his car and go and see my parents, try to build a relationship with my father, and then I just come back the next morning. And this one particular time, as I said, I sat back down, and eventually he got angry with me and he went. And the next morning my mother phoned me rather early. Are you fine? I said, of course I'm fine. What's up? And the poor plane had crashed and they had all been killed. And I should have been on that airplane. And I said to myself, is this just fate, or is this luck, or is this imagination on my part? But it actually happened to me. Stories that you hear about, with the hand forcing you down, God's hand, if you will, your angel's hand, happened to me. And I've talked to many and numerous other people, similar circumstances, and it saved their career, their marriage, their life, whatever it was, right? All these things have occurred in life when it comes to decision. So I guess the question comes, when I come to a decision, a major decision, what should I do? Well, I think I should stop and not act impetuously. I should stop and reflect. Mark Twain has said, get a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle, and you got to make a decision. Okay, what are the positives and what are the negatives? And then you will be able to see in front of you, and you will be able to evaluate. If I go left, these are the consequences, right? So it's very clear in that sense. So we don't have to be foolish about making decisions in that sense, especially the major ones. But once again, once you're fully engaged, you are responsible for it. And as I alluded to a little bit earlier, I think that we have to stop being victims. I mean, there are 1.5 million semi-homeless and 500,000 permanently homeless people in North America. And this has got to be a scandal, because these societies, these countries are wealthy, for sure, wealthy beyond imagination. But they're capitalistic economies, so they are harsh and hard. And you have to put in your time. You have to work hard. You have to do something. You can't be a victim of circumstance in your life. Absolutely not. And once you are responsible and you're not a victim, you feel free, because it is my life, and my life is 100% my doing, my fault, in other words. And you know what they say? Critical thinking is everything, especially when you're going to be responsible for your decisions. And critical thinking is great, truly great. You take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. Dave here. Today is July 18th. This is the 27th day of our El Camino journey. The weather today has been about the same as yesterday. It's been cooler than some of the previous days with a little bit of sun in the afternoon. Overall, it has been very comfortable. We went from Ponferrada in the morning to Villafranca del Bierzo in the afternoon. And we walked through a lot of vineyards and we saw a lot of grapes. Other parts of the journey took us through downtown Ponferrada and the outskirts where we walked along the side of the road. Now, thinking back towards my youth, I had a summer job one year where I worked at a bookstore. And there was a guy who worked there. He was an older man. His name was Gary. And he used to always say to us, the younger people working there, he'd say, life, it's all about the decisions you make. So every day, perhaps to go into work, you turn right, you leave your driveway, you turn right, and you drive down the street. What happens if someday, instead of turning right, you go left? And he used to say this all the time. And I think back then, we were quite young and we didn't really understand what he was talking about so much. But the fact is, even the smallest decisions really do change your life. For example, Leon and I have been walking this El Camino trip for quite some time. And 1.5 or 2 weeks ago, we departed ways with a man who was walking with us, Rodrigo. And once we said our goodbyes, we did not see him again. He decided to stay in an albergue in a small town, and we decided to walk on to the next town. And once you walk on, you get out of sync with the other person as the miles or the kilometers between become greater and greater. Well, the last couple of days, Leon and I have continued to follow our schedule, but we've only been walking 15, 20, 22 kilometers a time. And today, as we were walking towards Villafranca, who did we run into but Rodrigo? That we caught up to him, or he caught up to us, and we had a chat. If we had stayed behind or walked on, even 1 or 2 towns further at one of our stops, we would not have had this chance encounter with this man whom we met previously. It's all about these little things in life, the decisions we make. Another example from my youth. When I was in university, I worked at a winery in Pennsylvania, a small winery, and I got to befriend one of my colleagues. She was an older woman, probably in her 50s, who was originally from Taiwan, but she moved to America because she had married an American. We struck up conversation one day and became quite friendly whilst working because she had studied in Germany whilst in university. And I had studied in Germany as well when I was in university. So despite our age differences at the time, she was in her 50s, I was in my 20s, we could kind of relate to each other, and we used to practice our German in our downtime. Anyways, this friendship started because we both made the small decision to go to Germany for some time and to learn German. Then, I finished university and I was looking for a job. And I couldn't find a job. I was applying for teaching positions in Europe and South America, and I couldn't find anything. And the woman, Jean, she said to me, "Well, Dave, you should go to Taiwan. You could find a job there." And she was right. As soon as I had started looking for a job online, quickly I received some offers and away I went. Something that completely changed my life. And in fact, I wouldn't be walking the El Camino now if it weren't for the fact that I was working in that winery and struck up with conversation with this woman from Taiwan, all because we had the shared knowledge of this other, to us, foreign language. So the small choices we make in life, they all add up and influence us, our decisions, where we work, how we think, and what we do, and where we ultimately end up in our life. It may seem minor at the time, but actually, these minor decisions aren't very minor at all. Now to Leon.
Raises a good point, doesn't he? That we make decisions in life. But on a bit of a more negative spin, we must take responsibility for all the decisions we make, rightly or wrongly. And many times we make the wrong decision, as you probably know. There are no regrets in life, there are only lessons. So perhaps you get pushed into a career. Many people have told me that their parents pushed them into a certain perhaps career, a certain type of study, and they just resented it. Small story. I had a friend from South Africa who went to medical school for 1 year. A very good student, and he did very well in medical school. And his parents were thrilled. There's going to be a doctor in the family. And then in the second year, they had to deal with the cadavers, with the dead bodies that are soaked in formaldehyde to preserve them. And he couldn't take the smell, and he couldn't take the cutting either. And he began to get sick on a daily basis. And his professor said, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." But it wasn't fine, and he finally quit medical school. And his parents became extremely upset. He lost his relationship with his father. But then eventually he went back to school and he got a PhD in music, which was his first love. And I met him in Taiwan, and he loved music. So there's a decision that was a bad decision because we were pushed by our parents. Now, our parents love us, but parents are always conservative. They want the best for you, they believe, which is safety, but it might not be what you want, and it is your piece of life. My piece of life does not belong to my mother, my father, my brothers, my sister, etc. It belongs to me. That's the hardest thing to realize. And I think when you're on the El Camino, you're silent many periods of time because of the arduousness of walking, and you're forced to reflect on your life and the life that has brought you to this point right now as you're putting one foot in front of the other. And you must accept that I made those decisions. I made them. And conversely, as long as I'm alive, I can change them because I only know the now. The past is gone and the future is illusory. So I know right now, and I can gather my forces to be able to push on. So whatever decision you make, David and I often talk about critical thinking and time, which is extremely important because if you train your mind to think, and this is in theory why one goes to university, to learn how to learn. And once you learn how to learn, you're going to think about you, the beautiful you. There's no one like me. There never has been, and there never will be. But I must open me. No one can do it but me, and that's great. And I can make those positive decisions that bring me to this point. And David's point is well taken. I made the decision to visit my son, to come to Taiwan, to attend a church, and that's how I met David. So those were decisions I made. And without making the decision at 19 years old to leave my little village in Canada, I would never be talking to you now. Back to Dave.
Yes. So Leon's point is very good as well, that we do need to take responsibility for our own decisions. And sometimes these decisions, although at the time we might think we've made the right decision, discover it's not the right decision, but then ultimately a lot of these decisions, these bad decisions or life lessons, they do indeed straighten out in the end and help us figure out who we are and what we actually want in life.
Thing, please reflect whenever you make a major decision. A wonderful situation from Mark Twain, a wonderful ideas. You get a piece of paper, blank paper, and you divide it in two. You draw a line down the middle, and you take the decision. If I decide whatever that it is, you write, this is the result, good result, bad result. And at the end, you can compare, and you can then draw your own conclusion. So you take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.